The night hung heavy over the dusty settlement, the kind of chill that made lantern flames shiver inside their glass. Most folks were asleep behind crooked fences and patched-up roofs. But one lone figure moved quietly near the edge of town, where soldiers kept their makeshift holding pens. She walked with careful steps, hands tucked into worn pockets, straw-colored hair tucked under a faded bonnet. She wasn't the kind of woman townsfolk noticed, and that suited her fine. People paid more attention to the chained Apache man tied behind the corral, as if he were some wild creature caught for show rather than a human being who once rode free across the plains. The soldiers talked big about justice and peace, yet even from a distance, she could see the bruises across his back and the way he kept his gaze fixed on the ground, refusing to give them anything. She had promised herself she would never return to that place. But something about the sight of him pulled at her like a buried memory. She knew the war between settlers and tribes had taken lives on both sides, and rumors claimed he belonged to a feared band that raided ranches across the frontier. Folks whispered that the captive Apache fought like a ghost and slipped through bullets like wind. She looked past the stories and saw a man exhausted, shoulders strained from rough rope, pride holding him upright even when strength was failing. That quiet determination stirred something she could not ignore. Her past had taught her what it felt like to lose freedom, to be trapped under orders, to be treated like nothing. Maybe that was why she stopped walking away. She waited until the guards changed shifts. Boots crunching along the dry dirt road. The lantern outside the pen flickered weakly, half burned down. She stepped closer, pretending she was just wandering, pretending she wasn't trembling inside. He lifted his head a little, not fully, just enough to see her shoes in the moonlight. His eyes carried a calm fire, steady and sharp, not begging for help and not pushing her away. There was no fear in them, only the weight of decisions already made long ago. She whispered softly so no one else might hear. She asked if he understood her, though she wasn't even sure what she meant. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned slightly to show how the rope dug into his wrists, rough fibers already soaked with blood. The sight of it shook her more than anything he could have said. Her heart pounded slow but hard, each beat reminding her that stepping closer meant crossing a line she could never uncross. She remembered the last time she disobeyed people in power. That decision cost her family, cost her safety, cost her everything she used to know. Since then, she survived by keeping her head down, mending clothes, sweeping floors, stitching broken blankets for strangers who never asked her name. She had built a quiet, unnoticed life, safe from trouble. Helping him meant breaking that safety open again. Yet walking away meant letting another person stay bound while she still breathed freely. The thought pressed heavy on her chest. She reached for the knot securing the chain to the post. Her fingers shook, not from fear of him, but from fear of what others would do once they learned she had a hand in this. The metal was cold, dirt caked around its edges, and it took effort to lift the latch. He turned just enough for her to see how tightly he held himself, ready to move, but refusing to escape until she chose fully. When the last link loosened, his arms fell free, and he stood slowly, like a mountain rising after being pressed into the earth. Their eyes met in silence. She stepped back to give him space, knowing the next moment would decide everything. He didn't run. Instead, he studied her as if trying to understand why someone who owed him nothing would risk so much. The world around them felt still, even the wind hushed as if waiting. He nodded once in quiet acknowledgement. Not a thank you, not a promise, just recognition between two souls who knew what freedom cost. She turned away first, expecting him to vanish into the darkness. But she heard footsteps behind her, slow and cautious. He wasn't heading for the hills. He was following her. They slipped out of town through the cattle pasture, where fences leaned crooked, and no one bothered keeping watch. Dawn would rise soon, and soldiers would notice their captive missing. She wondered if they would assume he escaped alone, or if someone saw her shadow in the lantern light. With each step across the open plains, she felt the distance grow between her and everything she once knew. She kept walking, unsure if she was leading him or just moving because her legs refused to stop. He walked beside her now, no longer trailing behind. His presence felt strong but not threatening, steady like a river pushing forward. She wanted to ask his name, wanted to understand the stories behind those scars, but words stuck in her throat. He glanced toward the horizon, as if sensing danger coming from more than one direction. She realized that even free men can still be hunted, especially when armed with nothing but endurance and will. Soldiers wouldn't just lose a prisoner. They would lose pride. They would chase. They would paint him as an outlaw, and her as accomplice. They reached a patch of boulders where they paused to breathe. The sky lightened with early shades of blue. She wrapped her arms around herself to stay warm. He stood a few steps away, silent but alert. In that moment, she understood that freeing him had tied their fates together, whether she meant it to or not. He had no safe place to return to, and she had no safe place to stay. Both carried ghosts from past battles, and now the frontier itself felt like a wide-open stage waiting for whatever storm would follow. A distant gunshot cracked across the valley, too faint to tell its source, but loud enough to grip her spine. He reacted instantly, stepping closer, posture tense, not touching her, but standing between her and the open field. Tracks in the dirt behind them stretched clear as daylight, leading straight toward the settlement. If riders followed those tracks, there would be no turning back, no way to explain why she chose mercy over law. His eyes met hers again, not asking permission, not offering apology, just ready for whatever happened next. The sun crept up, painting the land gold. Horses neighed faintly in the distance. She swallowed hard, breath shaking, feeling the world shift beneath her feet. Freedom had been simple in the moment she freed his chains. The price of that freedom had only just begun. They moved farther from town until the sun climbed higher, warming the earth beneath their boots. She kept glancing back at the open plains, half expecting riders to appear over the ridge. The Apache man walked just behind her, silent but watchful, his steps light despite the wounds on his wrists. He didn't ask where they were going, and she didn't explain. Maybe neither of them knew. What she did know was that every step pushed them deeper into land where rules changed in survival. Depended on instinct rather than law. Her throat grew dry as the day warmed. They stopped near a shallow creek, cutting through tall grass. She knelt at the bank and splashed water onto her face, pushing dust off her skin. When she looked up, he stood on the opposite side, cupping water in his hands before drinking. There was a calmness in the way he moved, like he belonged to the land itself. She wondered how long he'd been captive before that night. She wondered how many days he stood in chains pretending he was still free. She wanted to ask him everything, but questions felt heavy. She feared the answers might change how she saw him. She finally spoke, her voice steady but quiet. She told him she didn't free him out of pity. She said she couldn't stand seeing anyone in chains, no matter where they came from. He listened, eyes narrowed slightly as if weighing her words. He pointed to the rope burns on his wrists, then looked toward the plains. His meaning was clear. Being unchained didn't mean he was safe. Then he touched his chest lightly, as if giving her his name without speaking it aloud. She repeated the sound softly, careful not to mispronounce it. There was strength in the name, old strength, rooted in mountains and stories she would never fully know. She hesitated before offering her own name. She always kept it hidden, a habit from a life spent running from trouble rather than walking toward it. Still, she gave it to him. As they moved on, she began to speak more, sharing what little of her past she dared. She told him she once lived in a bigger town far east, was working as a seamstress in a place where people smiled to your face and betrayed you once backs turned. She didn't say everything, not yet, but she told enough for him to understand she knew what it felt like to lose trust. He listened without judgment, and his silence wasn't empty. It felt like patience, as if he understood that truths came in pieces, not all at once. When they reached a stretch of land scattered with old fallen timbers, she paused to rest. He scanned the area first, circling the brush to make sure no one had followed. She watched how he moved, step after step, leaving almost no trace. It struck her that he had grown up learning how to move like that, how to listen to wind and soil, how to find a path where others saw only open ground. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A stranger? A burden? A mistake waiting to happen? Or someone trying to repay a debt she could never explain? She finally asked him why he followed her, rather than running west toward his own people. He stood still for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the mountains in the far distance. He traced a line in the dirt with the toe of his boot, then another crossing line. It looked like a trail cut off, blocked by something. She realized he wasn't just avoiding the soldiers. He couldn't return, not yet. Something had happened long before she ever saw him in chains. Something that left him alone even when free. The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes of distant riders. He stiffened and raised his head like a wolf catching a scent. She grabbed her small satchel and stood quickly. The two of them slipped into the shade of a dried-out ravine, crouching low behind brush and tangled weeds. They waited in silence. Hooves thundered across the plains far to the south. Whether they were soldiers or ranch hands out early, she couldn't tell. But the rhythm of the hooves soon faded, leaving only the whisper of wind. He didn't move right away. He stayed still, eyes narrowed, as if measuring the land for threats she couldn't see after the riders passed. They continued walking, this time keeping low, moving through dips in the land rather than open ridges. Hours passed before they reached an abandoned wagon half-rotten under a cottonwood tree. She sat on the wheel rim, rubbing her sore feet. He knelt in the grass, slicing a strip from his torn garment and wrapping his wrists to keep dirt out of the wounds. She watched the way he tightened the cloth, jaw clenched against pain. He didn't complain, didn't ask for help. She offered water anyway, and he accepted with a short nod as evening approached. They made camp near a cluster of stones that shielded them from wind. She gathered broken branches while he started a small flame using rocks and dry brush. The fire burned low, hardly more than embers, enough for warmth, but not enough to give away their location. She sat close to it, pulling her knees to her chest. The silence stretched long between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He finally spoke, not in full sentences she understood, but pieces of words that carried meaning. She recognized a few from traders and travelers she'd overheard in markets. He pointed toward the north, drawing a line in the dirt. Then he made a looping gesture, like a path winding through valleys. She understood. He knew a route to safety, but the journey wouldn't be easy. She wondered if he trusted her enough to travel with her, or if he was simply letting her walk beside him until their paths split. Either way, she felt the land shifting beneath her sense of purpose. What began as a single act of defiance was turning into something deeper, something threaded with consequence. The night air grew colder. Coyotes howled far off, their cries rolling across the plains. He didn't seem startled. He listened like someone recognizing distant voices. She lay awake long after the fire died down, staring at the stars. The more she thought about her old life, the smaller it felt. Sewing clothes for strangers, living quietly, trying not to be noticed. It had been safe, but it had not been alive. Out here, every breath felt like a choice. Every step carried weight. She wondered if she was becoming someone new, or simply returning to who she was before fear shaped her into silence. When dawn came, he tapped her shoulder gently to wake her. His expression carried urgency. He pointed to tracks in the dirt, fresh hoofprints heading their way. They packed quickly, leaving no trace of their camp. As they moved north, she realized they were now truly fugitives. Soldiers wouldn't forget a man escaping captivity. They wouldn't forget a woman who helped him. They would brand them criminals, call her misguided or dangerous, pin blame on her for whatever violence followed. She knew their chase had only just begun. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Dust clouds rose in the distance, moving fast. Someone was tracking them with intent. She took a shaky breath, gripping her satchel tighter. The Apache man stood tall beside her, eyes fixed on the horizon, not afraid, just ready. She understood that whatever awaited them ahead, they could no longer turn back. The land stretched far and wild, full of shadows and unspoken history. Their journey was no longer about escape. It was about survival. They moved deeper into the wild country, where the land rolled uneven and brush grew thick enough to hide both people and their footprints. The clouds overhead gathered into long gray streaks, and the wind carried the scent of rain. She kept close to him now, not only because he knew how to read the land, but because danger felt closer with each passing mile. The hooves behind them came and went, always distant, never fully gone. Sometimes they heard dogs, sometimes voices carried faint across open plains. The soldiers weren't giving up. They wanted him back in chains, and they needed someone to blame for losing him. Her face was likely burned into their memory now, which meant they weren't chasing just a man. They were chasing a pair. They walked without talking until they reached a narrow canyon split by old stone. The walls rose sharply, giving them shelter from wind, but also trapping them if riders caught up. He paused at the entrance, studying the tracks in the dust. She noticed hoofprints leading in, then circling back out. Whoever came through before them had turned around. Maybe the canyon had a dead end, or maybe they feared ambush. He stepped forward anyway, choosing the narrow path, trusting instinct rather than safety. She followed, though every step made her chest tighten. Inside the canyon, the sound of the wind faded. The world felt still, carved from silence. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady yet tense. He checked the rock walls for loose stones, scanning for places where someone might hide. She wondered if this was how he lived even before chains, always aware, always watchful. She tried to imagine what his life was before he was taken. Was he a scout? A warrior? A hunter? Or simply a man who belonged to a people defending land that had been shrinking year after year? Halfway through the canyon, she stepped on something half buried in the dirt. A piece of broken leather, torn roughly, stained with what looked like dried blood. Nearby, a scrap of cloth hung from a thorn branch. He picked it up and examined it, jaw tightening. It wasn't from a soldier. The stitching was different, the material thicker, worn by someone who lived off the land rather than supplied by government posts. She watched him rub the fabric between his fingers, eyes narrowing with recognition. He dropped it and motioned for silence. They pressed close to the rock wall, moving slower now, at the end of the canyon. They found remains of a campfire, covered in cold ash. She noticed crushed footprints around it, deeper than soldier boots, lighter than ranch hands. Some smaller, some large, patterns of movement that told a story she didn't know how to read. He knelt and touched the ash, then lifted his palm and blew lightly. The dust floated faintly, meaning it hadn't been there long. Whoever camped there had left only hours before. She asked quietly if it was his people. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he drew a symbol in the dirt, shaped like a circle broken on one side. She stared at it, unsure of its meaning. His gaze softened briefly, then hardened again. Whatever group had been here, they weren't just passing travelers. They had purpose, and that purpose might intersect with theirs in a way she wasn't ready for. They continued north until the canyon opened into a valley dotted with sage and scattered pine. The wind picked up again, and with it came the sound of distant thunder. Rain began to fall lightly, tapping against leaves, turning dust to soft earth. They found shelter beneath an overhang of stone. The rain fell harder, washing away their tracks. She felt relief at that, knowing it would buy them time. He watched the horizon, hands folded, shoulders tense. She finally asked him what the torn fabric meant. He paused, searching for the right way to explain. He looked at her, then pointed toward the mountains. He spoke slowly, using the few shared words they had found. The group that passed through the canyon belonged to a smaller band, not fully aligned with his own people. They didn't take prisoners, but they didn't trust strangers. If they crossed paths, she wouldn't be safe, even with him beside her. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. The war between settlers and tribes had layered wounds upon wounds. Some bled under the surface long after treaties faded. As night fell, they lit a small fire again, hidden from open view. She watched sparks rise into the dark. He ate in silence, movement slow from exhaustion. She noticed how the rain had softened the dried cuts on his skin, making some bleed again. She offered him a strip of linen from her pack. He hesitated but took it, wrapping his arm. She realized helping him made her feel more grounded, like she had a purpose beyond running. When the rain stopped, he shifted his attention to the sky. Stars emerged through thin clouds, scattered and bright. He pointed to one cluster, tracing a path across the constellations. She followed his gesture, learning how he navigated by light above rather than trails below. He drew another line across the ground, connecting where they were to where they needed to go. It wasn't just a route, it was a plan, but plans rarely hold against fate. Before dawn, he woke her with a tap on the shoulder. His expression was sharp, alert. She listened, ears straining. At first, she heard nothing, then faint crackling, not thunder, not hooves. Something moving through brush. He motioned for her to pack quickly. They covered the traces of their camp and slipped into the tall grass as the first hint of daylight touched the sky. They crawled forward until they reached a slope overlooking a clearing. Below, 3 figures on horseback moved slowly, scanning the land. These riders weren't soldiers. Their clothing blended with earth tones, and weapons hung low, not polished like military gear. They searched the ground methodically, like hunters tracking wounded prey. The Apache man narrowed his eyes. He knew them. She held her breath as one of the riders dismounted, crouching to examine mud prints the rain hadn't fully erased. He pointed to the ridge, and the others urged their horses in that direction. She gripped his arm in panic, but he gently pulled her back, signaling patience. The riders moved past them, unaware they were only yards away. When the danger passed, she whispered, asking if they were after him or her. His silence was heavy, not uncertain, but unwilling to confirm the answer. She realized then that danger wasn't just coming from behind. They were being hunted from more than one side. Soldiers followed orders. These men followed something else. Revenge, perhaps. Or opportunity. They continued moving into thicker forest. The trees grew taller, branches forming a canopy that swallowed sunlight. It felt safer, but also heavier, like the land carried old memory. She stumbled on tree roots more than once, and he caught her arm before she fell. His grip was firm, yet careful. She wondered how someone so guarded could still act with gentleness. By midday, her legs ached and her lungs burned, but he urged them forward. They stopped at a stream to drink. She noticed carvings on a nearby rock, faded symbols she did not understand. He stared at them a long time, shoulders tense. These weren't fresh. They were old, etched long before soldiers built forts and towns spread across plains. She asked quietly if this place meant something to him. He didn't answer. He touched the rock with his fingertips, then stepped back, as if the memory cut too deep. She wanted to comfort him, to bridge the silence, but the forest shifted suddenly with the sound of snapping branches. Both turned quickly. A figure stepped out from the trees not far ahead, bow drawn, eyes fixed on them. The rider from the canyon had found them, only this time on foot, silent as shadow. She froze, breath caught. The Apache man stood tall beside her, no fear in his posture but no aggression either. The stranger stared at him first, then at her. Recognition flickered, but not relief. Something darker moved across his expression, something shaped by history she did not know. The bowstring tightened. The forest held its breath. Nothing was resolved. The storm had only begun. The bow was drawn tight. The forest hushed to silence, and the air felt thin between them. She stood still, knowing any sudden movement could spark something neither side could turn back. The Apache man stepped forward slowly, hands open, showing he carried no weapon. The stranger's eyes flicked from him to her, confusion mixing with guarded anger. It wasn't the look of someone hunting a prize, but someone struggling to understand why one of their own would travel beside a woman from the settlement. She swallowed, heart pounding, unsure if words would help or make things worse. The Apache man spoke first, low and steady. Though she couldn't understand most of it, she caught pieces. A name, a place, a past wound. The tension shifted with each word. The stranger's jaw loosened, though his bow remained drawn. Something passed between them that belonged to another life, a story carved in memory rather than language. When the stranger finally lowered the bow, the breath she'd been holding escaped all at once. Another voice called from the trees, and two more figures appeared from the shadows. They carried spears and war-worn buckskin travel garments, their faces drawn from long journeys. They approached with caution, studying her as if trying to decide whether she was a threat or simply out of place. The first man spoke to them in quick, hushed words, glancing her way with disbelief. Whatever he said made them look less hostile, though not yet welcoming. The Apache man turned to her and motioned gently for patience. This was his world now, and she was stepping into it like someone crossing a river without knowing its depth. She stayed quiet, trusting him. He spoke again with the others, his voice rising and falling like the rhythm of wind through branches. At last, one of the newcomers extended a hand toward her. Not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement that she stood beside someone they respected. They traveled together, toward the mountains, moving slowly and staying hidden. The rain finally cleared, and the sun warmed the leaves overhead. As they walked, she noticed how the others glanced at her, curiosity softening into acceptance. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone who had risked everything to free one of their own. They didn't fully understand why, but they recognized the cost. When they reached a narrow valley, hidden by tall rock walls and thick pine, it felt like stepping into another world. Smoke drifted from low fires, children played near a creek, and elders sat weaving baskets beneath the shade. It wasn't a large camp, but it carried a sense of home, a place guarded by both tradition and silence. The Apache man slowed his steps, eyes searching the faces of those gathered. A woman approached first, older, her hair braided with beads and feathers. She looked at him long and hard, then touched his shoulder with a trembling hand. Relief washed over her face. The others gathered around, speaking in hushed excitement. Words she didn't understand filled the air, but their tone carried gratitude and disbelief. It became clear he had been gone longer than she imagined. Some feared he had been killed or lost forever. Now he stood among them alive, though changed by everything he endured. She stepped back, giving space for reunion she had no claim over. Soon, one of the elders invited her to sit near the fire. Though conversation was broken by language gaps, they shared what they could. A young girl handed her a woven blanket to warm herself. Someone else offered food. Slowly, the circle around her shifted from guarded curiosity to quiet acceptance. She realized she wasn't just tolerated. They understood she played a role in bringing one of their own home. As night settled over the valley, she and the Apache man stood near the creek, away from the firelight. The air smelled of pine and earth, fresh after days of dust and running. He looked different now, shoulders less tense, face less guarded. But he wasn't simply returning to his old life. Something about the journey had carved new paths in him, just as it had in her. She told him she was grateful he followed her that first night, even though she never asked. He nodded slowly, then tapped his chest and drew a line outward, meaning he chose to stay near her by choice, not need. She hesitated, wondering where her path led now. She could return to the settlement, try rebuilding the quiet life she once knew. But the thought felt hollow. That life belonged to someone who no longer existed. He reached down and picked up a stone from the creek, then placed it in her hand. It was smooth, warm from his touch, simple yet meaningful. He pointed to the valley, then to himself, then to her, forming a circle with his hand. The meaning was clear. She had a place here if she wished. Not as an outsider lost in someone else's story, but as someone who helped shape it. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She felt like she was choosing a direction. She told him she would stay, not just for safety, but because the land felt honest and open. He nodded once, a small smile tugging at his lips. In the days that followed, the camp prepared to move deeper into the mountains, away from patrolling soldiers. She helped gather supplies and learned small pieces of language, laughing when children corrected her pronunciation. The Apache man stayed close, but didn't hover. Their bond grew with shared work, shared silence, and shared survival rather than dramatic vows. Rumors spread that soldiers still searched the plains for the escaped prisoner. But the land shielded those who knew how to blend with wind and stone. She didn't fear capture anymore. The choices she had made led her somewhere new. Somewhere she didn't have to hide who she was or carry guilt alone. One morning, as sunlight filtered through tall pines, she stood beside him overlooking a ridge. The valley stretched beneath them, quiet and alive. He took her hand, not in command or dependence, but in companionship. The past still lingered in scars and shadows, but the future was theirs to shape, free from chains. Free from fear, they walked forward together through the whispering grass. No longer fugitives, but a pair who chose freedom not as escape, but as a way to live with purpose. The frontier still held danger, and the world outside might not understand them, but here in this wild land, their story finally found peace, and the journey led them not just to safety, but to a new beginning where two lives once bound by chance grew into something steady and strong, carried by trust and the promise of a life built on freedom rather than fear.